we, when we're courageous, what's really in charge is our deliberation and reason, that we see the best thing. We see the ideal, we see the good, the beautiful, and we think, okay, this is what I want to be aiming for here. And then we will commit ourselves to doing that. So I think that you then are leading your emotions, and not being led by them.
Hey, this is Sharif here with another episode of the Golden Hour, joined by Dr. Kevin Majors. Kevin, good to be back here with you again.
Hey, Sharif, it is great to be back with you.
Well, Kevin, I thought in this episode we could discuss the virtue or the ideal of courage. And I thought it's very interesting because this is a virtue that's obviously been treated a lot in the tradition, like going back to the Greeks, I'm sure, and philosophy since then. But it's an ideal that I personally associate with something like battle or knights fighting each other or something. But that's not my reality. So, and that's probably not the reality for many people who listen to the Golden Hour, is that their job involves sitting at a desk or going to meetings or dealing with people. So the question is, how is courage still relevant to people living in modern times? Or how does a person in modern times live this ideal of courage?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, Sharif. And I do think that it is central to people thriving in the challenges today, because courage is particularly about how we relate to challenge as challenge. So that to the extent that something is difficult for us to live, we need courage to live it. So looking forward to difficulty in an upcoming task, or looking forward to engaging a difficulty in a positive way, that is really the essential aspect of courage. So it does have it has its parts, like any kind of virtue, but the sense of being committed, to doing the right thing in a certain task or setting, which means then welcoming the difficulty that comes, and being willing to let it be difficult. I think those are that's the essence of what it means to be courageous. So as long as there are challenges in life, we need courage to meet them.
Okay. Can you distinguish then, courage is often described as being about fear. I think oftentimes these ideals or virtues have an emotion that they're related to or moderating. So how does it relate then to fear or to challenge? Or does all challenge can provoke a kind of fear response in you? So it's just looking at it different ways, or how would you think about courage and challenge versus courage and fear?
Yeah, so courage presupposes then that there is some kind of difficulty that you have to be vigorous in meeting. So fear would mean that you vigorously run from it. So you use all that you can to get away from it. Daring is actually the passion about approaching it. So some people have too much daring, and so they become reckless. And true courage or fortitude moderates daring, so that even though you feel like, you could just, heedless of all danger, run into something, that in fact you do the reasonable thing. But that is less Aquinas says that challenges on their own tend to moderate daring, but they don't on their own tend to moderate fear. So the desire to run from them on their own, they kind of increase fear. So that's why it's more especially the thing of courage or fortitude to be able to withstand that fear and to moderate it. So fear then is welcomed and thereby moderated. Daring on its own, I guess you could say, is welcomed, and then also made sure it doesn't go too far. So that there is a kind of mean there between fear and daring to follow what is the path of reason.
Okay. Now, a related question is that oftentimes I'll face in work a challenge that doesn't seem to involve fear. Like, okay, I have to enter all these things in manually, and it's going to be an hour of very rote work. So that's challenge. It might make me frustrated or bored or something like that, but it wouldn't necessarily provoke fear. So do I need courage for that? Is that, would you say, wow, that was really courageous, you just taking on that rote task and pushing through? Doesn't seem exactly how I would use the word courage, but would that fit under your definition?
Well, you could ask, what would be the qualities in you that that task would be testing? Because courage is you going out to meet the test. So if there's any motto that we would give courage, I think it's the saying, bring it on, the more the better. So if you could look at that task and say, to some aspect of it, bring it on, the more the better. Maybe it's the complexity itself. Maybe it's the roteness. Maybe there's something in you that you would have to be moderating. But again, courage is the ideal that governs challenge as challenge. And so if you can be welcoming something with a heart, like with your heart in it, that's actually what courage does. It lets you put your heart into the challenge. That's the and courage, to put the heart into it. So yeah, I would think that, in fact, that is a good example of an ordinary circumstance that it does actually require a kind of courage. Now, you could work in a way that you just are hoping to avoid the difficulties, but that wouldn't be a courageous way of working. It's not trying to avoid difficulty that makes us courageous, right? It's going to meet it. So as long as you had that sense going in that I'm going to grab the bull by the horns right here, I'm going to really get into this, and I'm going to go to the hardest part first. There is a kind of courage that comes in putting the hardest thing first. And that's always advice we get, right? For every day, try to do the hardest thing in your first golden hour of the day. I think that's precisely why you want to have a sense of courage. So if you're putting off the hardest thing to later and later and later, you might not get to it. That would be a default then against it. And that's what courage would help you to kind of rectify and see, now there's a new way of doing this, putting your heart into it right away.
Yeah. Okay, so this is great. Maybe we could get in a little bit more into this thing of courage and physical thing. I think that's still my image of it is fighting or something, going into war. And so one dimension of that is, or maybe in sports or something, like I played rugby for a little bit, and you definitely need a lot of courage to go up and try to tackle someone who's bigger than you or something. Now, one dimension in those situations is that you have people there who are encouraging you, right? They're giving you courage by cheering you on, or if they're, that if you mess up, they're going to make fun of you for it. So that there's like a fear motive there too. So maybe it's like fear counterbalancing the other fear. But it's much different for someone who's working at a desk where there's no one there to kind of encourage them. So it's just these small struggles throughout the day where it's just them and the challenge, them and the task, and nobody's going to know really if they don't act courageously in that task. So what advice would you give to someone in that situation? How do they, encourage themselves, practically speaking, to engage these challenges when they're just sitting at their desk?
Mm-hmm. Well, first, I would agree that the prime case of courage, according to Aristotle in the Peripatetics, is sudden death in battle. So yes, that is, and so there's all these elements that it's as you're attacking, right? The danger of death as you're attacking in battle. And so that's why for Aristotle, courage also makes use of anger as an instrument, so that you can be, you can use anger in the moment to help you in the act of aggression, as you're taking on the danger of death. And so, strictly speaking, that's the prime case of courage. And that it's sudden just shows the depth of a habit, because if something is suddenly tested, it kind of shows your real nature. And habits by Aristotle are thought of as second nature. So it just meant that you had it deeply. If you could deal with the sudden danger of death in an attack that you have to repulse, then that's what he thought was the case of courage. But then it does extend to all these other things. And in some ways, it's part of every virtue as it's tested. And so the example that C.S. Lewis uses, one of them is honesty. That you it takes, in a sense, courage to be honest when it's hard, so that you're really tempted to tell a little lie to get through something. It takes courage then to stay honest. So just to say that I think that's an important element. That there's this this kind of prime case, but and then I don't know if I could. I think that the essential thing in courage is the reframe of the challenge, so that you're seeing what is the actual opportunity here. So just seeing this as an opportunity for courage already does help. And so acting for the sake of courage is a noble reason for acting. And knowing that something is hard and takes courage to do it, but you want to do it for the sake of courage, is a great reason. So that doesn't lessen the value of the act. All of this is actually in the Summa when Thomas is talking about courage. So trying to if you can reframe a challenge on your own in your work to the point where you can say, okay, now I see exactly how, like, what is the good here? Bring it on. The more, the better. You will have actually encouraged yourself.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so actually, the interesting, funny story about the anger thing, that was very illuminating. It struck a chord with me because I had a friend who was a programmer. He coded a lot, and sometimes when he was facing a very difficult project and a big deadline, he would do what he called rage coding, which he would listen to heavy metal music while he was in code for like 8 hours at a time. So he's kind of in line there with Aristotle, using anger as a means of overcoming that difficulty.
Yeah, Andrew Huberman talks about that too. That he would use that when he was doing grant applications, and he would get himself angry like that. Now, personally, I've never done that. So I guess I don't know. We all have different relationships with the emotion of anger. So, and I can get angry, but I never felt like it always seemed to me it's like using Snickers to run a marathon. It's just not good, clean fuel. It seems to me that so I guess maybe but there is an element of, at least what anger does is like it strikes at the cause of sorrow. So it strikes at the heart of the thing, that is grieving you and that you have to be courageous facing. So there is a sense that it does point the right direction for courage, and that courage, according to the Peripatetics, you use the anger then to accomplish the end. But the key is that you never want to be led by the anger. Like, I think it often happens in relationships that people won't say something to someone that's close to them about something that bothers them. And then until they get more and more angry about it. And then finally, like, the dam bursts and now all of it spills out. I think it's really much better to be upfront when things don't sit well with us or when we have concerns, not relying on anger to do it. And that's a key thing, is that when we're courageous, what's really in charge is our deliberation and reason, that we see the best thing. We see the ideal, we see the good, the beautiful, and we think, okay, this is what I want to be aiming for here. And then we will commit ourselves to doing that. So I think that you then are leading your emotions, and not being led by them. So that's an important concept of like self-leadership, you could say, which is, that's another IFS word for people who have heard our internal family systems talk. But it's this idea that you don't want to be led by your emotions into situations or into conflicts, but you do the leading, and they might come along, and that's fine. You accept them, you let them come along.
So I'm interested in, when you're dealing with patients who have anxiety, is because it seems like we've made somewhat of a distinction here between the courage needed for situations where there's like a physical threat. So, and I think people have anxiety about things like that, like fear of heights, and even maybe to some extent public speaking. There's a kind of more visceral, experiential challenge there that you get adrenaline, and so there is this kind of physical response. But then on the other hand, a fear of a future event, like fear of getting fired, or some things that are more conceptual or rooted in your own thoughts or worrying. So is there any difference then in how the fear is working there? and then also in what courage looks like for those different types of situations?
Yeah, I think this gets into that courage it has three phases, I would say. So there's essentially before, during, and after. So beforehand, courage looks like commitment or determination. During, courage looks like endurance of whatever is going against you, the pain, the anxiety, whatever it might be. And then afterwards, courage is the habituating of what you're afraid of. So you're less afraid of it the next time. And that's confidence. So you have commitment and then the endurance and then confidence. So in some of those things you mentioned, it's when you say it's more visceral, it's also true that it's probably just more present. So, but if you were worrying about, let's say, and I have patients who come to me because they know that they'll be attending a board meeting on the 20th floor with big windows, and they're scared of heights, and so this is an issue for them. So already, it's in their mind as a worry, and so now they're worrying about it. So one thing then is being committed to doing what you need to do, being committed to fulfilling your duty, to doing the right thing, to growing in courage, that pre-commitment beforehand. That's really the first part of courage. And that's where the reframe is really essential. The next one is when you're actually in the situation, being able to endure the anxiety and to welcome it, I would even say. And to the point where, now this is another one of these debates among philosophers, but do you have to rejoice in it? And Aristotle said, you don't actually have to rejoice in it, but at least it can't make you sad. So in the moment, but ideally he thought, yes, you would actually have joy in it. So but that he thought, especially when there's physical pain, he said that might be too much to ask. So that it's enough that you're not sad by it. Really, in a sense, that phase of courage is more about mindfulness. That you're able to be with those emotions and not resist them and to feel them actually, but still then be doing what you need to do. And then the last part, maybe that's the effect of the behavior, is that having faced this thing, you will feel more confident for it the next time. And so then courage turns into confidence, as you develop a virtuous cycle of meeting a particular kind of challenge. So it might be, for instance, that if you've never asked a boss for a raise, that just the thought of that makes you very anxious. And you might have thoughts like, instead I'm going to get fired. Well, then the idea would be, if that actually is the thing to do, and if you are due a raise, then be committed to it. Commit yourself to a certain day and to how you're going to have a plan to be doing that. And that's the first step of courage. And then in the moment, it's like to be understanding it's going to feel awkward and it's going to, but maybe you've rehearsed it even beforehand, so that in the moment you're able to endure the anxiety while asking for the raise. And the effect of that then is you're more confident with regard to your boss in general, but also you're going to be more confident the next time you ask for a raise. So that gradually it gets easier and easier when appropriate to ask for raises. So that kind of thing where you're applying for new jobs, if you're applying to a school for some program, to be having stretch goals, how would you stretch yourself in applying? All of those are very ordinary ways that people really need courage per se.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I like that division. I think it really helps clarify how to make the practice of courage, make it accessible for people. So, how should people start to apply this? So, someone listening to this, how do they know? Okay, yeah, this is where I'm. I want to first be committed and then have this endurance, and I'm going to do that with this thing. How should they identify what this thing is?
Maybe it's good that people think about if they had no fear whatsoever, which, by the way, courage doesn't presuppose no fear. I think it takes into account that there will be fear. And so the amount of fear is irrelevant to courage in the sense that it's not like you're uncourageous just because you have a lot of fear. You can be totally courageous and still fear. But you could ask yourself, just in a thought experiment, how would my comportment in my job or in my like social life or family life, how would it change if I did have no fear and I knew that I wouldn't have fear? What kind of challenges do you habitually avoid? Yeah, and habitual avoidance is the biggest obstacle, I think, to progress. We just take certain forms of growth off the table. Like, that's not me. I would never do that. Like, would you volunteer for more responsibilities at work? Would you look for more occasions for public speaking if you had no fear? Would you play a musical instrument in front of other people? So how would you kind of go outside of your comfort zone, if you had no fear whatsoever? So that is then for you a realm of courage. Another way of thinking of it is uh, just for people listening to this, think, what is today the biggest challenge you're going to face? And get something in mind, like what is actually your number one challenge today? And then instead of hoping against the difficulty, you know, maybe you can look and see, no, this difficulty is there so that you can grow by means of it. How could you say, bring it on, the more the better, to that particular difficulty? And that would put you already in just today practicing courage. That's why I think courage really as an ideal is something that can be lived every single day. And it just means that we have this attitude of welcoming challenge, and welcoming the difficulty as a means of growth.
Yeah, and to your first point, that reminded me. I kept thinking labels as you were talking. That any place where you have these labels for yourself, or where other people have maybe labeled you, and you've kind of gone along with that or accepted it, that's a good area then to practice this courage, to find opportunities for overcoming that.
Exactly. I think this thinking of courage gets really to the core of fixed concepts we have of ourselves. So we think of ourselves as not being able to do certain things. So if you hear yourself just saying, "Oh, I would never do that," or "I can't do that," but it's something you would actually like to do, if it's something you would do if fear was not an issue whatsoever, then it's something courage can help you with. So your very fears can be, in a way, a guiding light for your courage. And it can show you then, ways that you could grow. And then you just want to start small in practice and build it up. Get used to welcoming challenges, get used to welcoming the difficulty in challenges, and then gradually try to apply that more and more to important challenges in life.
Great. So, Kevin, okay, I have a question that's maybe slightly different topic now. So I think in this episode, you've cited Aristotle a lot and Thomas Aquinas a lot, and maybe more than previous episodes. So it seems like there's a lot of philosophical influence or of the tradition in these ideas of courage. So I'm also wondering how present this ideal of courage is in modern behavioral psychology, and how people are using it in therapy or psychology or psychiatry. And how do you distinguish between this philosophical approach to it and psychological approach to it? What is psychology adding? What is philosophy adding here?
Yeah, that's a great question. The only discussion of courage I've ever seen in psychology is in the book No Bad Parts. So, and in the rest of the IFS literature. So, Self Therapy by Jay Earley, and there are these books that talk about like, how do you know that you're in true self? So, and you're not being dominated by some fixed mindset, some fixed idea. And they talk about things like you have a sense of clarity, sense of curiosity, sense of compassion, constancy, courage is one of those two, connectedness. So all these C concepts. So, and Richard Schwartz talks about this as that we are and this gets into like a theory of self that it's an interesting concept. I'm not exactly sure what what to make of it as a psychological principle versus some kind of spiritual idea. But the idea is that these qualities come naturally to the true self, and they really cannot be done by parts. So parts don't do them. So just getting yourself to a point where you're curious about something is a grounding exercise, so that you get unfused from your psychological parts. So from the warrior, from the firefighter, whatever it might be, the critic. So that you get grounded. So courage, he thought, is one of those two. And he sees it very much as I've discussed it here, as the willingness to embrace challenge, to do the right thing. So that is interesting. It is completely absent in the rest of cognitive behavioral therapy that I've seen. So I certainly haven't read every book out there. So I'm happy to see that probably there will be some, but it's not a common concept. Philosophically, I think in more martial societies where warfare was a fact of life, I think that courage was much more present as a sign of flourishing. So just the idea that it was, and maybe you see this in honor cultures, but in honor cultures, there's a sense like, I will not be a coward, or I won't be, and so it's really incumbent then on the people to be courageous and to stand up to challenge, to threats. So maybe there's just like in a modern society where that's less of an issue, we hear therefore less talk about it.
Mm. But you would argue that it's still very important. That's the argument you're making.
I think so. And I think that when I think of what we talk about in optimal work, in a way, everything we talk about is a psychology of challenge. So the psychology of embracing challenges. So really, to me, the essence of optimal work's approach is courage. So it's this ability to commit yourself, and to shape yourself through that commitment over time. So to stretch yourself according to your highest ideals until you are really living those ideals in every area of life, in work and the rest of life. And I think to do that, you have to be able to say, bring it on, the more the better.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, I just have one last question for you. So with challenge, so we always talk about not just challenging yourself, but challenging yourself according to your highest ideals. So it seems like there's something kind of added on to courage, which is giving it this kind of direction, that it's not just going out, embracing every single challenge, but in some sense there should be the right challenges, or the challenges and also engaging them, in a way that you're living your highest ideals. So I wonder if you could just speak to, is that the best way to put it, or is there something related to the concept of courage that helps you see, what's the right challenge?
So what courage essentially does in Aristotle is it protects reason, so you can, with prudence, see the true good, and with justice, set to carry it out in life, and then not be taken off course by fear. So, and then temperance, not be taken off course by pleasure. So this idea of right reason in action, that's the general theme of the virtuous living. And what courage does is it particularly takes the aspect of challenge and says that you maintain right reason, which is being deliberate, but also for the right ends. And you live that even when it's tough. So in the way we formulate things in optimal work, it's to be able to embrace challenges in living your highest ideals. And that is essentially where all of right reason comes in. So when we talk about living ideals, we're talking about what is truly makes for flourishing, and so the ideals can't be misused. So to be really truly living them is to start to live all of them. And so courage protects that process of growing in virtue from fear, which is actually probably the biggest challenge to it.
Okay. All right, Kevin. Well, I think that's a good note for us to end on here. We're basically over time.
So, Sharif, all right. Well, thank you. Great questions.
Okay. Thanks so much for being on. We'll be back next week. Well, thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Don't forget to check out OptimumWork.com for a set of online tools to help you engage challenge in your life. See you next week.